Hey everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to do a deep dive into something that's causing a lot of buzz right now, and that's Bitcoin. Specifically, we're looking at the price prediction for tomorrow, April 2nd, 2025.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting time for crypto right now, especially with these new global tariffs that Donald Trump just enacted on Canada, Mexico, and China.
They just went live, right? Today is April 1st.
Yes, exactly. Today's the day.
So before we get too far, I just want to mention that we've got a whole bunch of sources in front of us. Recent analyses, some market trend data, a few news headlines that caught our eye, even pulled up some historical charts.
We really wanted to get the full picture, yeah.
Exactly. And, distill all that down into something actually useful for you guys listening. So let's kick things off by looking at how the market's been behaving lately.
Well, Bitcoin's been kind of stuck in this range between $84,000 and $88,000 for the last week or so of March.
Kind of just bouncing around in there, huh?
Yeah, consolidating, as they say. And now analysts are really divided on where it's going to go from here. Some think we're due for a breakout to the upside,
Okay.
while others are predicting a pullback.
I see.
And, like we mentioned, those tariffs coming into play today are definitely adding to the uncertainty. But on the other hand, April has historically been a pretty good month for Bitcoin. I mean, if you look back over the past 10 years, the average gain in April is almost 13%, which is pretty remarkable.
Wow. So that's a pretty significant historical trend. So you're saying we've got these two big forces at play right now, these new tariffs and Bitcoin's generally strong performance in April.
Yeah, it's like a tug-of-war.
Okay, so let's dig into those tariffs a bit more. What are some ways they could directly impact Bitcoin's price today, now that they're officially in effect?
Well, the immediate impact is going to be volatility. Like increased short-term price swings, that's almost guaranteed. Now, the big question is which way that volatility will go. Will it be up or down? And like I mentioned earlier, there are kind of two main schools of thought here.
Okay.
Some analysts believe that these tariffs could push some investors towards Bitcoin, kind of as a safe haven asset,
Yep.
like a hedge against potential economic instability.
Right. Because Bitcoin's decentralized.
Exactly.
Not controlled by any government.
Yep. Not tied to any particular economy, and it has a fixed supply, so it can't be inflated away like traditional currencies.
So in that scenario, the tariffs actually end up being bullish for Bitcoin.
Exactly. Increased demand, potentially higher prices. But on the flip side, some analysts worry that these tariffs could trigger a more general risk-off sentiment in the market, where investors become more cautious and start selling off assets that are perceived as risky.
And Bitcoin, because it can be volatile, could get caught up in that sell-off.
Exactly. So in that scenario, we could actually see Bitcoin's price decline.
So, up or down, it sounds like big price moves are likely. With all that in mind, what are some specific price levels that we should be watching today as the market reacts?
Well, on the bullish side, that key resistance area between $88,000 and $90,000 is super important. If Bitcoin can break through that, there's a lot of potential for it to run up towards $90,000, maybe even $100,000.
Okay, that's a pretty significant jump. What about on the downside? Where could we see support if things turn bearish?
Yeah, so the key support level is between $80,000 and $82,000. That's where we've seen buying interest come in pretty strongly in the past.
So if the price drops down there, that could be a buying opportunity for some people, or at least a sign that the selling pressure might be easing up.
Right. But, realistically, the most likely scenario for today is probably going to be Bitcoin just kind of testing that range between 86,000 and 87,000, kind of like feeling out the market, seeing how everyone's reacting to the tariffs.
That sort of thing. So for listeners who maybe aren't actively trading Bitcoin, what you just said gives them some context for how the market might react today. But for those who are trading, what are some of the actual entry and exit points that people are discussing, like specific price levels?
Sure. So I've seen quite a few analysts suggesting an entry point around $84,500. That's right around that recent support level we talked about.
So buy if it dips down there, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And as for taking profits, there's a range of targets being thrown around. 87,000 is seen as a pretty conservative target, for those who like to play it safe. 90,000 is considered a more moderate target. And for the more aggressive traders, 95,000 is a price level that some are eyeing.
So those targets are all based on where the price might run into resistance, potentially causing a pullback.
Yep, exactly. And of course, it's super important to have a stop-loss order in place just in case things go the other way. Most analysts are recommending a stop loss somewhere around $82,500.
Okay, so that's a safety net to protect against a really sharp decline.
Exactly. And, it's interesting. I've seen a lot of chatter on social media, X as they're calling it these days, with people talking about buying Bitcoin. If it dips down to that $81,300 to $84,000 zone.
So some people are actually hoping for a dip so they can buy in at a lower price.
Exactly. They're looking for a bargain, essentially.
So we've got this historical trend of April being a good month for Bitcoin, and there's some genuine excitement about the potential for further price gains. But are there any warning signs that we should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. You always got to be cautious. And one thing that's got some analysts a little bit worried is the overall sentiment in the market right now. Like, there's a lot of bullishness, a lot of hype, and sometimes when everyone's expecting the price to go up, that's when things can actually turn south.
Right, like the old saying, buy the rumor, sell the news.
Exactly. And there's this blockchain analytics firm called Santiment, and they actually track social media sentiment. And they're saying that right now there's a lot of excessive bullishness. They're actually using that word, excessive. So they're seeing that as a potential contrarian indicator, like maybe the market's getting a bit ahead of itself.
Interesting. So it sounds like there are a couple of different ways to look at this. On the one hand, we have those historical April gains for Bitcoin, and there are also longer-term factors that could push the price higher, like growing institutional adoption and the potential for the Federal Reserve to shift its monetary policy.
Yeah, those are definitely all bullish factors.
But then on the other hand, we have this immediate uncertainty created by these new tariffs and this potential for too much optimism in the market, which could lead to a correction.
Yep, that's a pretty good summary of the key tensions right now, is like which force is going to be stronger, the historical trend or the current uncertainty?
Right. And just to zoom out a bit, there are analysts like Timothy Peterson who are still predicting that Bitcoin will reach new all-time highs within the next 9 months. So even with these short-term challenges, the long-term outlook is still looking pretty good for many people.
Absolutely. I think it's important to keep that long-term perspective in mind.
So for everyone listening, the key takeaways are these. Bitcoin has a history of strong performance in April, but those gains are now running up against the uncertainty created by these new tariffs and potentially overheated market sentiment. The most likely scenario for today is Bitcoin testing that $86,000 to $87,000 range.
Which leads us to the big question. What do you think is going to be the dominant force driving Bitcoin's price today? The historical April gains or the immediate impact of the tariffs and that potential for a sentiment-driven correction? It's a fascinating situation. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time.